She'd fed 3 strange children who showed up every night at her cafe, a charitable act born of loneliness and a soft spot for the downtrodden. Little did she know, their father, the most powerful vampire in existence, a being of immense age and terrifying power, was watching from the shadows, a silent guardian and judge. Before we dive deeper into this gothic tale, take a quick moment to share what draws you to vampire stories in the comments below. Your thoughts truly help support this channel, and I love reading them. The Whisper Light Cafe wasn't much to look at, even on its best days. Tucked between a boarded-up bookshop, its windows dusty and filled with forgotten dreams, and a relentlessly humming 24-hour laundromat, the small diner sat forlornly on the corner of a rain-soaked street where the city had simply forgotten to glow. Its amber lights, perpetually flirting with burnout, flickered weakly behind fogged windows, casting pathetic halos against the eternal drizzle that lacquered the pavement, turning it into a distorted mirror reflecting blurred streetlights and garish neon signs. But for Melissa John, a woman clinging to the last threads of hope, it was everything: her livelihood, her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a dream she refused to let die. Melissa wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements almost robotic after years of graveyard shifts and thankless tasks. At 28, she'd become intimately familiar with the melancholic rhythm of late-night work. The sigh of the espresso machine as it cooled, the soft, almost mournful jazz that played through crackling speakers, a soundtrack to her solitude. The occasional rumble of a delivery truck shattering the silence as it splashed through the ever-present puddles outside. Business had been brutally slow for months now, a slow, agonizing decline that threatened to extinguish the Whisper Light completely. The new bistro 3 blocks over, sleek, aggressively Instagram-worthy, and unforgivably expensive, had siphoned off nearly all the neighborhood traffic, leaving small, independent places like her struggling to merely keep the lights on. She sighed, a sound heavy with resignation, and glanced out through the rain-streaked window. Beyond the glass, the city stretched out into the inky darkness, its taller buildings swallowed by low-hanging clouds, their peaks lost in the swirling mist. A figure stood across the street, barely visible through the downpour, a tall, pale silhouette lurking beneath the flickering street lamp. Melissa blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, a product of sleep deprivation and wishful thinking. When she looked again, he was gone, vanished as if he were nothing more than a figment of her weary imagination. Trick of the light, she told herself, turning back to stack clean mugs on the shelf, the mundane task offering a small measure of comfort. The door chime startled her, its cheerful jingle at odds with the somber atmosphere. Melissa looked up, surprised to see customers at this hour, well past 10 on a Tuesday night when even the most dedicated regulars had long since retreated to their homes. Her surprise deepened into bewilderment when 3 small figures shuffled hesitantly through the doorway, rain dripping from their dark, antiquated clothes onto the worn linoleum floor, each drop a tiny, defiant splash. They weren't like any children she'd ever encountered. Each standing between 3 and 4 feet tall, they moved with an unnatural stillness, their striking silver hair plastered to pale faces that seemed to absorb and amplify the cafe's amber light, creating an almost ethereal glow. The eldest, a girl Melissa instinctively assumed, had her hair pulled back so severely it accentuated her sharp, delicate features, highlighting high cheekbones and eyes that glimmered faintly, almost luminous in the dim cafe light, like twin embers glowing in the dark. The second girl, slightly smaller than the first, had softer, more childlike curls framing a face filled with a quiet, unsettling curiosity. The boy, the smallest of the 3, positioned himself slightly in front of his sisters, a silent protector, his unervingly perceptive gaze sweeping the empty cafe with an awareness far beyond his apparent years. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked and ready to enjoy this story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another story just as interesting as this one, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Their clothes, though soaked, were immaculate, dark, old-fashioned layers that looked hand-tailored with intricate embroidery along the collars. A subtle display of wealth and craftsmanship that seemed strangely out of place in the humble cafe. They wore no coats, seemingly unfazed by the biting cold. Their skin was bloodless, almost translucent, like fine porcelain. And when they stepped fully into the light, Melissa noticed a subtle but unsettling detail. They cast shadows that seemed wrong somehow. Too long, too dark, too independent from their bodies. Hello, Melissa said, forcing warmth into her voice despite the strange prickle of unease crawling up the back of her neck. Welcome to Whisper Light. Can I help you? The tallest girl stepped forward, her movements precise, almost unnervingly formal, like a tiny queen granting an audience. When she spoke, her voice had the careful cadence of someone translating thoughts from a much older, perhaps forgotten, language. We require sustenance, she said softly, her voice a melodious whisper that seemed to carry an echo of centuries past. We have currency. She held up a small leather pouch, its worn surface hinting at age and untold stories. Melissa caught the dull gleam of what appeared to be old coins inside. Not modern currency, but something antique, undeniably valuable, each coin a small piece of history. Melissa nodded slowly, trying to mask her growing confusion. Of course. Are you here alone? Where are your parents? The three children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that Melissa couldn't decipher. A language spoken not with words, but with subtle shifts of expression and almost imperceptible movements. The eldest girl's expression remained carefully neutral, a mask of composure that hid any flicker of emotion. We are unaccompanied this evening, she replied, her voice echoing with a subtle, almost imperceptible sadness. We were told this establishment serves warm food. It does, Melissa said, her instincts as a waitress overriding her growing unease. Kids were kids, and these three, despite their strangeness, looked undeniably hungry and cold, though they showed no visible signs of shivering. Why don't you sit down? I'll make you something good. The children chose the booth by the window, the one where rainwater traced slow, meandering paths down the glass, creating ephemeral works of art. They climbed onto the worn vinyl seats with careful, deliberate movements, folding their hands on the table in perfect symmetry, as if following an ancient and unbreakable code of conduct. The smallest boy kept glancing toward the rain-dark street, his silver eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting someone, or perhaps something. Melissa pulled out her order pad, though the cafe was empty enough that she didn't really need it. Do you have any allergies? Anything you can't eat? Another silent exchange, their eyes locking for a fleeting moment in a private conversation. We are unfamiliar with your cuisine, the eldest said, her voice betraying a hint of curiosity beneath its formal tone. We require warmth, sustenance. Simple preparations are acceptable. Melissa's brow furrowed. Their phrasing was so strange, so formal, almost archaic. And their porcelain pallor worried her. When was the last time these kids had eaten? Okay, she said gently, forcing a reassuring smile. How about warm milk with honey, some fresh croissants, and a bowl of soup? Does that sound good? The middle girl's eyes widened slightly, a brief spark of genuine emotion that flickered across her face. The first real sign of vulnerability Melissa had seen from any of them. That is acceptable, the eldest said, and something in her tone suggested it was more than acceptable, that it was exactly what they needed. Melissa returned to the kitchen, her mind racing as she heated milk in a small pot, adding honey and a pinch of cinnamon for warmth and comfort. She warmed croissants in the oven, filling the small space with their comforting aroma, and ladled butternut squash soup into 3 ceramic bowls, each one a miniature haven of warmth. As she worked, she couldn't help but glance through the service window at the children. They sat perfectly still, hands folded, watching the rain with an intensity that made her deeply uneasy. Outside, barely visible through the downpour, the tall figure stood across the street again, a silent sentinel lurking in the shadows. This time, Melissa was certain she saw eyes, red eyes, reflecting the cafe's light like those of an animal caught in headlights. She shook her head, blaming it on the long shift and tired eyes. When she brought the food to their table, arranging it carefully with a motherly touch, the children stared at the meal with something approaching reverence, as if presented with a sacred offering. Here you go, Melissa said, her voice softening with genuine concern. Careful. The soup's hot. The eldest girl picked up her spoon with delicate precision, brought it to her lips, and tasted the soup. Her eyes closed briefly, and a soft sound escaped her, almost like a sigh of relief. Is it okay? Melissa asked, suddenly anxious, wanting to provide them with even the smallest comfort. I can make something else if it isn't perfect. It is perfect, the girl whispered, her voice filled with an emotion Melissa couldn't quite name. We have not experienced such warmth in some time. The other two began eating as well, their initial caution melting away, replaced by something that looked like hunger, deep, desperate hunger that made Melissa's chest tighten, with a mixture of pity and protectiveness. I'm Melissa, by the way, she said, crouching beside their booth, trying to establish a human connection. What are your names? The eldest set down her spoon carefully, as if even the smallest gesture required immense concentration. I am Arya. These are my siblings, Serafina and Adrian. She gestured to each in turn. It's nice to meet you, Melissa said. Listen, I don't mean to pry, but it's pretty late, and this isn't exactly a safe neighborhood for kids to be wandering around. Does someone know where you are? Arya's expression didn't change, remaining carefully guarded. But something flickered in her luminous eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. Our guardian is occupied, she said carefully, choosing her words with painstaking precision. We were exploring. We will return before our absence is noted. Melissa frowned. Everything about this felt wrong, the formal speech, the strange appearance, the late hour, the evasive answers. But she'd learned long ago that sometimes kids ended up in difficult situations, and pushing too hard only made them run. Well, she said instead, softening her tone. You're welcome here any time you need a warm meal. Okay. Adrian, the smallest, looked up at her for the first time, his silver eyes wide and solemn. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a question laden with a weight far beyond his years. Why? What, sweetheart? Why do you offer kindness? We are strangers. Melissa felt her throat tighten at the question, at the genuine confusion in his young face, as if kindness were some foreign concept he'd never encountered. Because you're kids, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, and kids need kindness more than curiosity. When they finished eating, Arya placed several old coins on the table, far more than the meal cost, a king's ransom for simple fare. Melissa tried to refuse, but the girl insisted with quiet dignity, her eyes holding a depth of centuries. The sustenance was satisfactory, Arya said, standing. We offer gratitude. You're very welcome, Melissa replied, walking them to the door, a silent vow forming in her heart to protect these strange, lost children. Stay safe out there. Okay? The rain's getting worse. She watched them leave, 3 small figures disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Through the window, she thought she saw them pause on the corner, and the tall silhouette stepped from the shadows, moving toward them. The children didn't flee, didn't cower. They approached the figure as if they knew him, as if they were drawn to him by an invisible thread. Then the rain seemed to swallow them whole, obscuring them from view, leaving only the echoes of their presence in the night. Melissa turned back to clear their table, still troubled by the strange encounter, the unanswered questions swirling in her mind like the storm outside. As she picked up the coins, she froze, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cafe. They weren't modern currency at all. They were old, centuries old. If the dates were real, each coin a relic of a forgotten age, minted with symbols she didn't recognize and stamped with a crest, a crown over 3 stars. She looked up sharply, her senses on high alert, but the street outside was empty. The children were gone, vanished without a trace. The mysterious figure had vanished with them, leaving no sign of his passing. Melissa John, closing shift waitress at a failing cafe, had absolutely no idea that she'd just fed the 3 royal heirs of the Undying Court, or that their father, Elric Vesper, the vampire king who ruled the night itself, had been watching from the rain, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and a faint glimmer of hope. The next evening, just before closing, the door chime rang again, its cheerful sound cutting through the quiet anticipation that had been building in Melissa's heart all day. Melissa looked up from wiping down the espresso machine, her hand pausing mid-stroke, and her heart did an odd little skip, a fluttering of both excitement and trepidation. The three children stood in the doorway, rain streaming from their silver hair, their pale faces turned toward her with something that looked almost like hope. "You came back," she said, surprised by the warmth and genuine happiness in her own voice. "You offered," Arya replied simply, as if this explained everything, as if her word was an unbreakable bond. "We have returned." "Well, come in out of the rain." Melissa gestured toward their booth by the window, her voice filled with a welcoming warmth. "Same spot as yesterday." The children moved to the window booth with that same eerie grace, water pooling beneath their feet on the worn linoleum, each puddle a miniature reflection of the cafe lights. Melissa grabbed a bar towel and brought it over, crouching beside the smallest. "Adrian, right?" When he nodded, his silver hair swaying with the movement, she gently squeezed water from the ends of his wet strands. "You're gonna catch cold walking around in weather like this." His eyes, those strange, luminous eyes, fixed on her face with unnerving intensity, as if trying to unravel the secrets hidden within her soul. "We do not suffer from cold," he said softly, his voice a haunting echo of something ancient and powerful. "But we appreciate the concern." Melissa smiled, trying to brush aside the unease that his words caused, and moved to the kitchen, her mind already planning their meal, a symphony of warmth and comfort. She warmed milk in a pot, adding honey and a generous pinch of nutmeg this time, a secret ingredient her grandmother used to add to warm milk on cold winter nights, a taste of home. Fresh croissants went into the oven, filling the cafe with their irresistible aroma, and she heated the last of the day's vegetable soup, adding extra herbs to boost its flavor and nutritional value. When she returned with the steaming mugs, Adrian reached for his immediately, his small hand trembling slightly. His fingers brushed against Melissa's hand, and she nearly dropped the cup, the sudden shock sending a jolt through her system. His skin was ice-cold, not just chilly, but preternaturally cold, like touching marble in winter, like pressing your palm against a frosted window, a bone-chilling coldness that defied explanation. No warmth, no pulse of life beneath the surface. Melissa's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away, didn't recoil in fear. Instead, she wrapped both of Adrian's hands around the warm ceramic mug, holding them there gently, transferring her own warmth to his icy skin. "There," she murmured, her voice soothing and reassuring. "Let that warm you up, sweetheart." Something rippled through the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that sent shivers down Melissa's spine. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A low hum, like a tuning fork struck in a distant room, the vibration resonating through the cups and silverware on the table, setting them trembling ever so slightly. The overhead lights flickered momentarily, their warm glow dimming and intensifying in an erratic rhythm, and in the mirror behind the counter, Melissa caught a glimpse of something impossible. A hairline crack in the glass, one that had been there for months, a permanent imperfection, suddenly sealed itself, the fracture disappearing as if it had never existed, the glass smooth and flawless once more. She blinked hard, certain that exhaustion was playing tricks on her, that her weary mind was conjuring illusions. "Miss Melissa," Serafina's voice pulled her attention back to the present. "Is something wrong?" "No," Melissa said quickly, shaking off the strangeness. "Just tired. Long day. Let me get your food." She returned with croissants and soup, arranging everything on the table with practiced care, each item placed with deliberate precision. The children ate slowly, savoring each bite with a reverence that made Melissa's chest ache with a mixture of sadness and a profound sense of connection. When was the last time someone had appreciated her cooking like this, had seen the love and care she poured into every dish? The door chimed again, its cheerful jingle sounding jarringly out of place. Two of her regulars, a night shift nurse named Carmen and a taxi driver named Joe, shuffled in, shaking rain from their coats and offering weary smiles. They ordered coffee, their usual pick-me-up, casting curious glances toward the children's booth. their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Those kids again?" Carmen whispered when Melissa brought their cups, her voice barely audible above the soft jazz. "They were here yesterday, too, weren't they?" "Just some customers," Melissa replied, keeping her voice neutral, wanting to protect the children from unwanted attention. "They're different," Joe muttered, stirring sugar into his coffee with excessive force. "Something not right about them." "They're just kids," Melissa said firmly, ending the conversation, her protectiveness flaring. But she noticed how Carmen and Joe left quickly, their coffee only half finished, their usual friendly banter replaced by uneasy silence. 20 minutes later, her manager, Ray, emerged from the back office, a clipboard in hand and concern etched across his weathered face, his expression a roadmap of stress and financial anxiety. "Melissa, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. He gestured toward the children with a discreet nod of his head. "You comped their meal last night. Can't do that anymore. We're barely breaking even as it is." "I'll pay for it myself," Melissa said quietly, her chin lifting in defiance. Ray sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's not about the money, Melissa." "Well, it is, but look, just no more free meals, okay? Not with the way business has been." Melissa nodded, though she had no intention of turning the children away, her heart refusing to let them go hungry. After Ray retreated to his office, defeated and resigned, Melissa noticed something odd. When she checked the tip jar an hour later, the old mason jar by the register where customers sometimes left spare change, it was fuller than it should be, the glass overflowing with coins. Not just fuller, but exact, the amount too perfect to be a coincidence. She counted quickly, her fingers flying over the cool metal. Enough to cover both nights of comped meals, plus the utilities bill that had been giving her anxiety all week. A weight lifted from her shoulders. She looked toward the window booth, her eyes searching for an explanation. The children sat in silence, watching the rain trace its intricate paths down the glass, and beyond them, barely visible through the downpour, that tall figure stood again across the street, a silent observer in the storm. This time, Melissa didn't look away, didn't pretend she didn't see him. She stared directly at him, her gaze unwavering, at the pale face beneath the hood, at the eyes that glowed faintly red in the darkness, at the regal stillness of his posture, the aura of ancient power that radiated from him. He didn't move, didn't hide, just watched. His gaze locked with hers in a silent battle of wills. Testing, she realized suddenly. He's testing something, probing her intentions, judging her worth. "Time to go," Arya announced, sliding from the booth with her usual graceful movements. Her siblings followed, their faces betraying a reluctance to leave, a sense of impending danger. Melissa walked them to the entrance, holding the door open against the wind, a protective gesture she couldn't resist. Rain lashed the sidewalk, creating swirling puddles that reflected the distorted lights of the city, and she grabbed an umbrella from the stand, offering it to them without a second thought. "Here, take this." "No need," Arya said gently, refusing the offer with quiet politeness. Then she paused, her luminous eyes fixed on Melissa's face, and she spoke with sudden formality, her voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier, the words resonating with an ancient power. "Warmth freely given shall not be forgotten." The phrase sounded ceremonial, ancient, like words from a ritual Melissa didn't understand, a spell woven with kindness and gratitude. "You're welcome," Melissa replied, her voice uncertain, a hint of fear creeping into her heart. "Stay safe. Okay?" She watched them disappear into the rain, their small figures swallowed by the darkness, the tall figure moving to meet them, his silhouette a looming presence in the storm. This time she saw him clearly, unburdened by the distortions of the rain. He knelt before the children, his movements surprisingly gentle, and Adrian reached up to touch his face, a gesture of familiarity, of family, of affection. "Father," Melissa thought, the realization dawning on her like a slow sunrise. He's their father. But what kind of father watched from the shadows instead of coming inside, offering his children comfort and protection? Melissa returned to her closing routine, her mind disturbed by the events of the evening, unable to shake off the feeling that she was caught in something far bigger and more dangerous than she could comprehend. She locked up at midnight, stepping out into the rain-soaked street, pulling her jacket tight against the cold, the wind whipping around her like a restless spirit. The cafe door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the empty street. When Melissa returned at dawn to prep for the morning shift, she froze on the threshold, her hand hovering over the doorknob, a sense of dread washing over her. Scratched into the wood of the door, small, precise, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a symbol she'd never seen before, a mark that defied explanation. A crimson sigil, still faintly warm to the touch, etched with something that definitely wasn't a key, an intricate pattern of lines and curves that seemed to pulse with an inner light. It looked like a seal, like a brand, like a claiming, a permanent declaration of ownership. Melissa's hand trembled as she traced the symbol's curves, her fingers tingling with an unnatural energy, and somewhere deep in her bones, she felt something awaken, something old and binding, like a contract written in warmth and kindness, signed without her knowing, a debt incurred that could never be repaid. The keeper's oath had begun, an ancient pact forged in the darkness. Melissa tried scrubbing the sigil off 3 times before her shift started, using every cleaning product she could find. It wouldn't budge, remaining stubbornly in place, a defiant mark on the wood. The crimson mark seemed etched into the wood itself, as permanent as a brand, an unremovable stain on her reality. She finally gave up, defeated and frustrated, and positioned a chalkboard sign over it, advertising the day's soup special, hoping to conceal the unsettling symbol from prying eyes. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. The image burned into her mind. The evening shift crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. The usual handful of customers came and went. Delivery drivers grabbing coffee, a student camping at a corner table with textbooks spread wide, their faces illuminated by the glow of their laptop screens. Melissa kept glancing at the clock, her anxiety building with each passing minute, wondering if the children would return, if she would see them again. They arrived at 9:30, right as the rain started again, as if summoned by the storm itself. This time, they weren't alone, the air thick with unspoken tension. A man entered behind them, his presence radiating an aura of menace that made Melissa's skin crawl. Tall, slim, dressed in a dark coat that looked expensive despite its austerity, its very simplicity a testament to its quality. His hair was iron gray, swept back from a high forehead, and his smile was too wide, too fixed, like something he'd learned to wear rather than felt, a mask that concealed a darkness within. He chose a table near the children's booth, his movements precise and deliberate, folding his hands on the table with unnerving precision. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as poured oil, dripping with a false charm that did nothing to disguise the predatory glint in his eyes. "Black coffee, please. No sugar." "Coming right up," Melissa replied, her instincts screaming danger, every fiber of her being on high alert. She brought the children their usual warm milk with honey and nutmeg, fresh croissants and soup, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the steaming bowls on the table, and noticed how they'd gone rigid in their seats, their faces pale and drawn. Adrian had positioned himself between his sisters and the stranger, a tiny shield against the encroaching threat, his small hands gripping the table edge with a desperate strength. The man sipped his coffee, his pale gray eyes never leaving the children, his gaze unwavering and unsettling. "A lovely evening, isn't it?" he said, addressing them directly, his voice a silky caress. "Rare to see young ones out so late." "I'm Pastor Merrick, and you are?" Arya's face remained blank, her expression unreadable, but Melissa saw her fingers tremble slightly as she reached for her milk, her composure cracking under the pressure. "They're just here for dinner," Melissa interjected smoothly, stepping between the tables, placing herself between the children and the potential threat. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Merrick's smile widened, though his eyes stayed cold, like chips of ice in a frozen lake. "How kind you are, feeding strays," he said, his words dripping with sarcasm. "That's very charitable." The word landed like an insult, a weapon disguised as a compliment. "They're customers," Melissa said firmly, her voice laced with steel. Same as anyone. Of course. Merrick took another slow sip of his coffee, his eyes still fixed on the children. Though one wonders where their guardians might be. Children shouldn't wander alone after dark. Dangerous things in the shadows these days. The threat in his words was gossamer thin, but unmistakable. A veiled warning that sent shivers down Melissa's spine. If you're not ordering food, I'm going to have to ask you to finish your coffee and move along, Melissa said, her voice low and dangerous. We're closing soon. Naturally, Merrick stood with fluid grace, his movements unsettlingly smooth, leaving exact change on the table, his actions precise and calculated. As he passed the children's booth, he paused, leaning in close, his voice a hushed whisper. Be careful, little ones. Not everyone is as hospitable as this kind woman. Some of us remember the old laws. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, the door chiming softly behind him, its cheerful sound mocking the tension that hung heavy in the air. Melissa exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath, her body rigid with fear. The children remained frozen in their seats until the sound of his footsteps faded down the street, their faces pale and drawn. Who was that? Melissa asked quietly, sliding into the booth across from them, her heart pounding in her chest. A hunter? Adrian whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with fear. A hunter of what? Melissa asked, her voice a low murmur, her heart sinking with a growing sense of dread. Arya's luminous eyes met hers, holding a depth of sadness and resignation, the weight of centuries reflected in their depths. Of us. After the cafe closed, Melissa locked the door and pulled out her laptop at the counter, her hands trembling slightly. The children had left quickly tonight, more frightened than she'd ever seen them, their usual composure shattered by the encounter with Merrick. And those coins, the antique ones they'd paid with, sat in her apron pocket like small weights, pulling her down into the depths of the unknown. She photographed one of the coins and ran a reverse image search, her fingers flying over the keyboard with frantic energy. The results made her breath catch in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs. Vesper Dynasty 1647 to 1842, Kingdom of the Undying Court. She clicked through academic articles and conspiracy theory blogs, museum archives and folklore collections, her eyes scanning the information with desperate intensity. The Vesper crest, a crown over 3 stars, appeared again and again, a recurring motif in the digital tapestry of information. Historical accounts described them as a noble house that ruled territories across Eastern Europe, their reign marked by both prosperity and brutality, their power absolute. They vanished mysteriously in the mid-19th century, disappearing from the pages of history as if they had never existed, leaving behind only whispers and legends. Legends claimed they weren't human at all, that they were something older, something more powerful, something that fed on. Melissa closed the laptop abruptly, her heart racing, a cold dread gripping her soul. No, that was ridiculous, she told herself, trying to rationalize the information, to dismiss it as folklore and fantasy. But Adrian's cold hands, the way their reflection seemed slightly off in the mirror, the figure watching from the rain with glowing red eyes, the door rattled suddenly, and Melissa jumped, nearly knocking over her coffee, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Through the glass, she saw Arya's pale face, her eyes filled with urgency and fear. Please, the girl said, her voice muffled by the glass and the storm outside. May we speak with you? Melissa unlocked the door, her hand trembling as she turned the key. All 3 children tumbled inside, more agitated than she'd ever seen them, their silver hair plastered to their faces, their eyes wide with panic. We must warn you, Arya said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. There are those who listen for us, who hunt us. The man tonight, he knows what we are. And what are you? Melissa asked, though part of her already knew, her mind racing to reconcile the fantastical with the reality before her. Serafina looked up, her eyes wide and frightened, her voice filled with a chilling resignation. We are the reason the second bell of midnight exists, she whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. The hour when hunters come. The second bell? Melissa repeated, confused, trying to grasp the meaning of their cryptic words. The hour that doesn't belong to day or night, Adrian explained, his voice filled with a haunting sadness. When the veil is thinnest, when we are most vulnerable. Melissa glanced at the clock, her eyes widening in horror. 11:47 p.m. You need to go home, she said, her voice laced with desperation. Now, where do you live? I'll drive you. We cannot tell you that, Arya said, her eyes filled with regret. But we should not have come tonight. We've placed you in danger. Then I'm walking you, Melissa said firmly, grabbing her coat and an umbrella, her resolve hardening. I'm not letting you go out there alone. Not with that creep lurking around. The children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them, but didn't argue, recognizing the futility of resistance. They stepped into the rain together, Melissa holding the umbrella. Candles were placed strategically on tables, the counter, along the window sills, their warm, flickering light pushing back against the encroaching darkness of the stormy night. The children, as if frozen in time, stood exactly where Melissa had left them. 3 pale statues bathed in the soft glow. Their silver hair, usually ethereal, now caught the flames, each strand shimmering like captured moonlight. Sit, Melissa managed, her voice sounding steadier than she felt inside. Please. They moved gracefully, almost ethereally, to their usual booth, settling in with an odd familiarity. Melissa, her mind racing, grabbed a stack of clean bar towels from behind the counter. Approaching them cautiously, she knelt beside Adrian first, concern etched on her face. Rain had mercilessly soaked through their delicate clothes, plastering strands of silver hair to their foreheads and slender necks. You're drenched, she murmured, her touch gentle as she carefully squeezed water from Adrienne's saturated hair. Hold still. She worked methodically, drying each child with practiced, almost maternal efficiency. It was the kind of instinctive care that came not from conscious thought, but from a deep-seated wellspring of human empathy. Serafina closed her eyes, a slight smile gracing her lips, as Melissa dabbed water from her pale face. Arya sat rigid, her small body tense, but Melissa noticed her shoulders gradually relax under the simple, unassuming kindness. There, Melissa said finally, a small measure of satisfaction in her voice, as she settled into the seat across from them. Now, I think it's time you told me the truth. All of it. Everything. The candles flickered erratically, as if responding to some unseen presence, a draft that shouldn't exist in the closed, protected space of the cafe. Arya folded her hands on the table, her gaze intense, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries, the burden of a secret she could no longer bear. We are Arya, Serafina, and Adrian Vesper, heirs to Alaric Vasisper, who was called the Vampire King, ruler of the Undying Court. Melissa's breath caught in her throat, a wave of disbelief washing over her. Yet, she didn't speak, didn't scream, didn't flee, just listened, her gaze unwavering. The man you saw tonight, Pastor Merrick, leads a faction called the Crimson Vein. They believe our bloodline is corrupt, that our father has grown too merciful, too soft. They see him as a danger to their traditions. Arya's luminous, unervingly intense eyes met Melissa's. They seek to end the Vesper line, to begin with us. Your father, Melissa said carefully, piecing together the puzzle. The man in the rain. He's been watching you. Testing? Adrian cleared his throat softly, his voice a delicate whisper. Testing whether mortals would show kindness or cruelty. Most show cruelty. Indifference at best. They turn away. They look down. They judge. But you! Serafina leaned forward, her voice barely audible above the howling wind outside. You're the first who's just been kind. Without asking questions, without wanting something in return. Melissa felt her throat tighten, a lump forming that threatened to choke her. She looked at these 3 pale, seemingly ageless children, because that's what they were, despite everything, and saw only fear and loneliness, a profound sadness that resonated deep within her own heart. Sit, she said firmly, rising to her feet. Eat. We think better with warm food. It's what my grandmother always said. She moved to the kitchen, her actions driven by muscle memory and fueled by the flickering candlelight. Milk into a pot, honey and cinnamon stirred in, heated gently until steam rose in lazy, comforting curls. She found cocoa powder and added it, remembering how Adrian had perked up at the mere mention of something sweet. When she returned with 3 steaming mugs and a plate of assorted pastries, the children stared at the cocoa as if she'd offered them treasure beyond measure. "You can drink this?" Melissa asked, suddenly uncertain, questioning everything. "I mean, we're young," Arya explained, offering a rare glimpse of childlike vulnerability. "We can consume warm liquids, certain foods. Our bodies still remember life. Cocoa especially. Something about the warmth, the sweetness. It comforts us in ways blood cannot." "There's an old law," Serafina added shyly, her cheeks flushed. "The Pact of Tables. It says any hearth that feeds the hungry becomes liminal ground, a space between worlds, place of power. Most vampires have forgotten it, but Father remembers. He honors the old ways. Is that why the shadows couldn't reach us?" Melissa asked, thinking back to the oppressive darkness she'd felt moments ago, when they were near the cafe. Arya nodded, her silver hair shimmering in the candlelight. "This place is becoming a hall, a sanctuary, because you keep feeding us without fear, without demand. The Keeper's Oath is awakening." "I don't understand," Melissa confessed, feeling utterly lost in a world she never knew existed. "You don't need to," Adrian said, wrapping his cold hands around the warm mug, savoring the heat that seeped into his bones. "You just need to be you. That's enough." Outside, the rain intensified, turning from a downpour to a veritable deluge. Through the candlelit windows, Melissa saw shapes gathering. Tall, gaunt silhouettes forming a tightening ring around the cafe. More than before, dozens perhaps, their presence radiating an aura of menace. The rain began to sound wrong, no longer the soothing rhythm of water, but something harder, sharper, like needles against glass, an ominous percussion. "They're here," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. The children moved closer together, their small bodies tense, seeking comfort and safety in numbers. Melissa stood, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach, placing herself instinctively between them and the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her feet planted firmly on the ground. The door sensor chimed, that bright, cheerful sound utterly discordant in the face of the gathering darkness. But no one entered. Instead, a voice, smooth and cold as winter ice, drifted through the rain-lashed window, cutting through the storm like a shard of glass. It was Merrick's voice, dripping with false civility. "Melissa John," it called, formal and mocking. "You harbor what is not yours to protect. Surrender the Vesper children before the second bell tolls again, and you will be spared. This is mercy I offer once and only once. Do not mistake it for weakness." The candles flickered wildly, as if struggling against an unseen force. Melissa's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles bone-white. Outside, the silhouettes pressed closer to the glass, their eyes like burning coals in the darkness, and the rain fell like daggers, each drop a tiny, agonizing wound. Somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll again, slow, deliberate, each peal resonating with an ancient power, counting down to midnight, to the second bell, to the hour when Melissa would have to choose. Surrender 3 frightened children to monsters in the dark, or stand against forces she couldn't possibly understand. She looked down at Arya, Serafina, and Adrian, at their pale, frightened faces lit by the trembling candlelight. "Get behind the counter," Melissa said quietly, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "And stay there." The bell tolled a second time, its sound echoing through the cafe, amplifying the growing dread. Instantly, the windows fogged, not with condensation, but with something thicker, more insidious, like frost spreading across glass, a creeping winter that threatened to consume everything. And fast. The crimson sigil on the door blazed to life, its light so intense Melissa had to shield her eyes, the air crackling with raw power. The candles guttered and swayed, as if caught in a wind that didn't exist, a phantom draft carrying the scent of decay and ancient secrets. Then, the door opened, creaking in protest as darkness spilled into the cafe. Merrick stepped inside, his eyes gleaming with cruel triumph, flanked by two figures in dark coats whose faces remained hidden beneath deep hoods, their presence radiating an aura of barely restrained violence. They moved with predatory grace, their footsteps making no sound on the linoleum floor, as if they were gliding on air. Behind the counter, Melissa heard the children's sharp intakes of breath, their fear palpable. The few remaining patrons, a Carmen, the weary nurse, and an elderly man who'd been nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, shrank back into their booths, their eyes wide with primal fear, their faces pale masks of terror. "Miss John," Merrick said, his smile sharp as broken glass, a cruel parody of human warmth. "Your time has expired. Step aside." Melissa's legs felt like water, threatening to buckle beneath her, but she forced herself to move, drawing strength from some hidden reserve. Not away from the children, but toward them, a shield against the encroaching darkness. She positioned herself defiantly between the booth and Merrick, her hands gripping a metal serving tray she'd grabbed without thinking, her only weapon against impossible odds, a ridiculous shield against unfathomable monsters. "They're under my roof," she said, her voice shaking but audible, defying the fear that threatened to consume her. "They're eating. How touching." Merrick's laugh was soft, almost pitying. "Brave, foolish, but brave. Do you even comprehend what you're protecting? These are not children, Miss John. They are parasites, leeches wearing innocent faces. They are a plague upon this world." "They're kids," Melissa shot back, her voice rising with defiance, fueled by a fierce protectiveness she never knew she possessed. "And they came here hungry. Isn't that enough?" Then, without warning, the windows exploded inward, not shattered, but exploded. Glass and rain and smoke bursting into the cafe like the wrath of God. A violent intrusion that shook the very foundations of the building. Melissa threw herself over the children's booth, shielding them with her body as shards of glass flew past, each one a potential death sentence. Wind howled through the space, extinguishing half the candles, plunging the cafe into a chaotic dance of light and shadow. The temperature plummeted so fast Melissa's breath came out in visible clouds, a chilling reminder of the encroaching darkness. Through the smoke and rain, a figure stepped across the threshold, an apparition of impossible power. He was tall, impossibly tall, his pale hair streaming behind him like liquid moonlight, his cloak billowing in a wind that seemed to emanate from him alone. Upon his head sat a crown of black iron, its points like thorns, catching the candlelight and throwing menacing shadows across the cafe walls, a silent declaration of his authority. His eyes glowed garnet red, ancient and terrible, sweeping across the scene with the absolute authority of a king. Alaric Vesper, the Vampire King. His gaze found Melissa first, crouched protectively over his children, a humble serving tray held like a pathetic weapon. Then it moved to Merrick and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, the air crackling with barely suppressed power. "They are eating?" Alaric's voice rolled through the cafe like distant thunder, resonating with an ancient power that silenced the storm itself. Merrick went rigid, his hunters taking an involuntary step back, their carefully constructed composure crumbling under the weight of the king's presence. "My lord," Merrick said, recovering with forced smoothness, his voice betraying a hint of fear. "We did not expect. You entered a place of hospitality?" Alaric continued, his words measured and cold, each syllable dripping with barely contained rage. "While the heirs of my line were at table, you threatened violence against a hostess offering shelter and sustenance. Explain." "This mortal has broken sacred law," Merrick countered, his voice gaining strength, fueled by desperation. "She feeds royal blood. A human offers sustenance to Vesper heirs without sanction, without understanding. This is blasphemy." "This is the Pact of Tables," Alaric interrupted, his voice like the snap of a frozen branch. His red eyes shifted to Melissa, piercing her with their ancient gaze. Is it not? Melissa straightened slowly, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, she felt the children pressing against her back, seeking shelter in her presence, drawing strength from her unwavering resolve. I don't know about pacts or laws, she said, her voice trembling slightly but holding firm. They were hungry, that's all I saw. Children who needed food. She met those terrible eyes, refusing to cower. Does it matter what they are? Silence stretched like a blade between heartbeats, sharp and agonizing. Then, something shifted in Alaric's expression, a flicker of something almost human. Not softening exactly, but something ancient and cold cracking just slightly, revealing a hint of the man beneath the monster. To you it matters not, he said quietly, his voice losing some of its harsh edge. To us, it changes everything. He turned back to Merrick, and his voice became iron once more, forged in the fires of ancient power. I invoke the old law. This house is under my vow. The mortal who feeds my blood without demand becomes keeper of this hall. None may harm her. None may threaten what gathers at her table. This is my decree. You cannot. Merrick began, his face contorted with disbelief and fury. I am king, Alaric said softly, and the words carried such weight that Merrick physically staggered, as if struck by an invisible force. I can. Merrick's face twisted with rage, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. You've grown soft, Vesper, weak. The court will hear of this. A human keeper for your own children? You make a mockery of our laws. I remake them, Alaric replied, his voice echoing with absolute authority. As is my right. The children emerged from behind Melissa, moving to stand beside their father, their silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. Alaric's hand came to rest gently on Adrienne's silver hair, a gesture startlingly tender, revealing a vulnerability he usually kept hidden. Merrick took a step back toward the shattered windows, his hunters already retreating into the rain, their faces hidden in the shadows. This isn't over. The Crimson Vein does not forget. We do not forgive. Neither, Alaric said, his voice laced with a threat that sent a chill down Melissa's spine. Do I? Merrick's smile returned, sharp and poisonous, a promise of future torment. Enjoy your sanctuary while it lasts, Miss John. I will return with a writ of ash, legal, binding, recognized by both courts, and I will watch this heretical place burn with you inside it. Then, he was gone, dissolving into the rain and fog like smoke, leaving behind a void filled with unspoken dread. The remaining patrons fled without paying, scrambling out the door and into the storm, eager to escape the supernatural drama that had unfolded before their very eyes. Melissa stood alone with the Vampire King and his children, surrounded by broken glass and guttering candles, her entire body trembling with delayed shock, the adrenaline slowly draining from her veins. Alaric turned to face her fully, his presence filling the small cafe with an almost unbearable intensity. Up close, he was even more terrifying than she had imagined, beautiful and terrible, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. You have my gratitude, Melissa John, he said, his archaic formality making the words feel like a binding contract, an unbreakable vow, and my protection for what remains of your life, while they sit at your table. No vampire in this realm may touch you. I don't understand any of this, Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible. You don't need to understand, Arya said softly, echoing her brother's words from earlier. You just need to keep being you. Alaric studied Melissa with those ageless eyes, his gaze piercing her very soul. The children will return tomorrow night, if you permit it. And I? He paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. I will ensure no further disturbance. Then, he stepped back through the broken window, his cloak billowing in the wind, and vanished into the rain with his children following like pale shadows, leaving Melissa alone in the shattered remains of her former life. Melissa sank to the floor amid the glass and water, her hands shaking uncontrollably, her mind reeling from the events of the night. Merrick's final words echoed in her mind, A chilling premonition of things to come. A writ of ash. Whatever that was, it sounded like a death sentence. Melissa didn't sleep that night. She sat at the counter until dawn, surrounded by broken glass and puddles of rainwater, waiting for Ray to arrive and fire her on the spot, her future hanging precariously in the balance. Instead, she heard different footsteps, soft, purposeful, unnaturally synchronized. 3 figures in dark clothes appeared at the shattered windows as the first gray light touched the sky. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her presence, moving with silent efficiency. They simply worked, their movements precise and coordinated. New glass materialized from seemingly nowhere, fitting perfectly into frames that should have required custom orders, their actions defying the laws of physics. Tools moved with surgical precision, guided by unseen hands. Within an hour, the windows were restored, not just repaired, but perfected, as if the night's violence had never occurred. The glass clearer than it had ever been, without a single scratch or imperfection. One of the figures left a leather purse on the counter before departing, their task completed. Melissa opened it with trembling fingers and found more of those antique coins, enough to cover the damage 3 times over, plus the month's rent she'd been dreading, a lifeline thrown to her in her darkest hour. By the time Ray arrived at 8 a.m., bleary-eyed and hungover, the cafe looked better than it had in years, a testament to the silent, unseen forces at work. Even the sign outside, which had flickered intermittently for months, glowed steady and bright, a beacon in the early morning light. "What the hell happened here?" Ray asked, staring at the pristine windows with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "Insurance?" Melissa lied smoothly, her voice betraying no hint of the terror she'd experienced. "Called an emergency service. They were incredibly fast." Ray looked suspicious, but didn't press, accepting the explanation without further question. He had enough problems of his own without adding more mysteries to the mix. Melissa spent her lunch break drafting rules on a piece of cardstock, her handwriting careful and deliberate, each word chosen with intention. House rules. No harm under this roof. No questions that hurt. Seconds for the small. Warmth freely given, freely received. She taped it beside the door, right next to the glowing crimson sigil that wouldn't fade, a constant reminder of the forces at play. It felt important somehow, like naming something gave it power, a way to exert control in a world spinning out of her grasp. The children arrived at their usual time that evening, appearing at the window booth as if summoned by an unseen force. But tonight felt different, lighter, despite everything that had transpired. The air hummed with an almost palpable energy, a sense of anticipation and cautious hope. Serafina carried a small cloth bundle, which she presented to Melissa with shy formality, her eyes downcast. Inside was a pressed white flower, its petals preserved perfectly, impossibly delicate, a relic from a forgotten time. "It's from our mother's garden," Serafina whispered, her voice filled with reverence. Before Father says it's the last one. We want you to have it." Melissa's throat tightened, overwhelmed by the simple gesture of kindness. "I can't take something so precious." "You already have," Arya said simply, her gaze unwavering. "You've given us something far more valuable." Later, while Melissa prepared their meal, she found Serafina drawing on a napkin with a pencil she produced from somewhere, her brow furrowed in concentration. When Melissa glanced over, she saw a detailed map of the cafe, but not as it was, but as it could be. This version showed hidden doorways, secret passages, safe corners, places marked with tiny stars and cryptic symbols. A sanctuary within a sanctuary. "What's this?" Melissa asked, intrigued. "Secret places? In case bad things come again," Serafina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now you'll know where to hide. Now you'll be safe." Meanwhile, Adrian was learning to fold napkins at the counter, his small, cold fingers working carefully, creating elaborate shapes, swans, flowers, and finally a tiny crown that he placed solemnly on Melissa's head, a symbol of her newfound role. "For the keeper," he announced, his voice filled with quiet pride. Melissa laughed despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and impossibility of it all. a genuine burst of joy that echoed through the cafe. For a moment, the cafe felt like it should. Warm, safe, full of simple, unadulterated joy. A fleeting oasis in a world consumed by darkness. The bell above the door chimed, shattering the fragile peace. A man entered, his coat damp from the perpetual rain, a badge visible on his belt, a symbol of authority in a city where authority was often meaningless. Detective, Melissa's instincts screamed a warning. Evening, he said, his tired eyes taking in the cafe, his gaze lingering on the shattered windows, now seamlessly repaired. Detective Morrison. Got a report about vandalism. Disturbance. Your neighbors heard breaking glass last night. Storm damage, Melissa said, wiping down the counter, attempting to project an air of normalcy she didn't feel. All fixed now. Morrison's gaze lingered on the children, on their pale skin and silver hair, their unusual appearance standing out against the backdrop of the mundane cafe. Those kids okay? They seem underdressed for the weather. They're fine, Melissa said, her voice hardening slightly, a protective instinct rising within her. Regular customers. Where are their parents? Morrison pressed, his gaze unwavering. That's not really your business? Melissa said more sharply than intended, drawing a line in the sand. Morrison studied her, and she saw the weariness etched on his face. A man who'd seen too much strangeness in this city to push too hard on minor mysteries. A veteran of countless battles fought and lost. Right, he said finally, backing down. Well, if you need help, real help you call. Understood? He left his card on the counter and departed, disappearing into the rain-slicked streets. But Melissa saw him pause outside the window, watching the children with troubled eyes before vanishing into the urban abyss. Another soul touched by the darkness that clung to the whisper light. An hour later, Alaric arrived, his presence both a comfort and a source of fear. He didn't burst through windows this time, his entrance far more subtle. He simply appeared in the doorway after closing, rain streaming from his cloak, his face etched with an ancient weariness. The crown was absent, but his authority remained undiminished, radiating from him like an invisible force field. The children immediately went to him, their faces lighting up with joy, and Melissa watched as he knelt to embrace them. A gesture so human, so paternal, it made her heart ache with a longing she couldn't explain. "May I speak with you?" he asked Melissa, his formal tone softening slightly, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. She led him to the kitchen, away from the children, seeking a moment of privacy. "Up low without the drama of battle," he said, his voice heavy with weariness. "Tired, ancient, and tired. You've tested humans before?" Melissa said, her voice laced with a hint of accusation. "With your children? How many?" 17 cities. Alaric replied quietly, his gaze distant. "Over the past 5 years. Everywhere we went, mortals either feared them, exploited them, or ignored them entirely. You are the first to simply feed them, to offer them kindness without expectation. Why test them at all? Why not just care for them yourself, openly?" Melissa challenged, wanting to understand the reasoning behind his actions. Alaric's garnet eyes met hers, his gaze piercing her very soul. "Because civil war is coming to the undying court. My rule is challenged by fanatics who believe mercy is weakness. If my children are seen as vulnerable, if I am seen as sentimental." He paused, his voice trailing off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. "They will be targeted to hurt me. I needed to know if there was still kindness in the mortal world, if sanctuary could exist. And you exist," he said simply, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "That is answer enough." He handed her a small, rolled parchment, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. "Rumors are spreading. Other vampires, refugees from the court's purges, are hearing of this place. They call it a safe house, a hall where no vampire may hunt if warmth is freely given. Some will come seeking shelter. Others will come seeking to destroy it." "Wonderful," Melissa muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You can refuse," Alaric said, his voice filled with understanding. "I would not blame you. This is not your war." Melissa looked through the doorway at the three children sharing a pastry, their laughter like the sound of wind chimes in the quiet cafe, a fragile melody in a world of discord. "They're just kids," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Someone has to care." Alaric's expression shifted, something between gratitude and grief flickering across his face, a complex emotion he struggled to contain. "You remind me why I still believe this world is worth protecting." After he left, Melissa was cleaning up when she heard it, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. A bell, not the door chime, not the cathedral bells from downtown, which often pealed their melodies across the city. This was different, deeper, resonating from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the cups and silverware and the very bones of the building itself. One single toll, a solitary peal of doom. The third bell. Instantly, the windows frosted over, the transformation instantaneous, as if the cafe had been plunged into the heart of winter. And in the ice crystals, a pattern emerged, intricate and delicate, a sign of the power that now resided within these walls. The Vesper crest, the crown over 3 stars etched in perfect detail across every pane of glass, a silent declaration of sanctuary. The cafe lights brightened without flickering, casting a warm, inviting glow. The air grew warmer, and Melissa felt something settle into place, a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before, as if she'd finally found her purpose. Like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed, unlocking a potential she'd never realized she possessed. The hall had awakened, and somewhere in the rain-dark city, enemies were already planning how to burn it down, how to extinguish the light that had dared to shine in the darkness. The frost pattern on the windows lasted 3 days, a constant reminder of the power that protected them. Then, Merrick returned, his presence a chilling harbinger of the storm to come. He came at dusk, when the cafe was half full with the evening rush, truckers grabbing a quick bite, nurses between shifts, a musician tuning a guitar in the corner, the familiar rhythm of life playing out against the backdrop of the supernatural. The children sat at their usual booth, their faces bathed in the warm glow of the cafe, warm milk steaming before them, their sanctuary seemingly secure. This time Merrick wasn't alone. He brought 6 figures in crimson robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their presence radiating an aura of cold fanaticism. But there was something worse, something that chilled Melissa to the bone. 2 uniformed police officers, their eyes glazed over, their expressions vacant, their movements mechanical. They looked dazed, confused, as if walking through a dream, puppets controlled by an unseen force. And Merrick carried a scroll, a weapon more potent than any blade. The parchment was ancient, its edges blackened and curling, bound with a seal of red wax pressed with a sigil Melissa didn't recognize, a symbol of forgotten power. When Merrick unrolled it, the words seemed to writhe on the page, written in a language that hurt to look at directly, a text that defied comprehension. "Melissa John," Merrick announced, his voice carrying through the cafe with unnatural clarity, silencing the murmur of conversation. "By the authority of the Crimson Vein and the Old Courts, I present a writ of ash." A hush fell over the cafe, the air growing heavy with unspoken dread. "This establishment has been declared a heretical sanctuary, in violation of the covenant of separation. It is to be burned to cleanse the blasphemy." The police officers stepped forward mechanically, their eyes fixed on some distant point. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate the premises. There's been a complaint." "A complaint?" Melissa's voice rose, incredulous. "About what? Serving food? Offering shelter? Harboring dangerous individuals?" Merrick supplied smoothly, his smile a cruel mockery of compassion. "Minors without proper guardianship. Health code violations. The authorities have been informed." Melissa saw it then, the subtle glamour in the officers' eyes, the way they moved like puppets on strings, their wills bent to Merrick's sinister purpose. He had manipulated them, bent them to his will, using his powers to subvert the very foundations of human law. "This is my business," Melissa said, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. These are my customers. You have no right. I have every right, Merrick interrupted, holding up the writ, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. This document supersedes human law. It is recognized by both courts, mortal and immortal. The building will burn before dawn. In the booth, Arya began to hum, so softly at first Melissa almost didn't hear it. Then Serafina joined her, their voices weaving together in harmonies that shouldn't be possible, creating a sound that made the air shimmer, a melody of defiance. Award! Melissa realized, her heart leaping with hope. They were singing protection, weaving a sonic shield around the cafe, reinforcing the magic that protected them. Adrian slipped a butter knife from the table, setting his small hand, his face set with a fierce determination that belied his age. He held it like a sword, ready to defend his sanctuary. The cafe door burst open, the intrusion as dramatic as it was unexpected. Alaric strode in, his presence filling the space like a storm contained in human form. He wore no crown tonight, but his authority needed no symbol, his power radiating from him in waves. The crimson-robed figures instinctively stepped back, their confidence faltering under the weight of his gaze. Merrick, Alaric's voice was cold iron, each word a hammer blow. You test my patience. I invoke law, not war, Merrick replied, though Melissa heard the tremor beneath his carefully constructed confidence. I offer you blood duel as is tradition, your life against mine. Winner claims the hall. I accept, Alaric said immediately, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. No, Melissa shouted, surprising herself with the vehemence of her protest. No duels. No vampires deciding what happens to my cafe. Both immortals turned to stare at her, their expressions a mixture of surprise and disbelief. This is human property, Melissa continued, her voice shaking but steady. Human business. You want to burn it? You'll have to do it in front of witnesses. Human witnesses. She grabbed her phone and started texting, her fingers flying across the screen, her mind racing. Messages to Carmen the nurse, to Joe the taxi driver, to Detective Morrison, to every regular who'd ever nursed a cup of coffee at her counter. Emergency at Whisper Light. Need witnesses. Please come now. What are you doing? Merrick hissed, his face contorted with fury. Inviting the neighborhood, Melissa said, meeting his gaze without flinching. If you want a spectacle, Merrick, let's give you a spectacle. Burn this place in front of a crowd. Let's see how your manipulation holds when dozens of humans are watching. Merrick's face twisted with rage, his carefully constructed mask of civility finally shattering. But Melissa saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold, assessing gaze of a predator weighing his options. Mass glamour was difficult, requiring immense concentration. Witnesses were dangerous, unpredictable elements that could disrupt his plans. And human authorities, even manipulated ones, couldn't ignore public violence, their control tenuous at best. Within 15 minutes, people began arriving, drawn by the promise of drama and the unspoken call for help. Carmen brought 2 other nurses, their scrubs still rumpled from their shift. Joe brought fellow drivers, their taxis lining the street outside, forming a protective cordon around the cafe. The musician called friends, a motley crew of artists and dreamers, their presence a symbol of defiance. Detective Morrison showed up, his hand resting on his weapon, his eyes sharp and assessing, his face a mask of grim determination. Melissa moved through the growing crowd, pouring coffee, offering pastries, turning hospitality into armor, transforming a simple cafe into a fortress of warmth and human connection. With each cup served, each small kindness extended, she felt the cafe grow warmer, stronger, its magic resonating with the collective will of its protectors. The Vesper crest on the windows glowed brighter, illuminating the faces of the assembled crowd. The bell above the door rang once, then twice by itself with no one touching it, a ghostly chime signaling the awakening of the hall. This changes nothing, Merrick snarled, his voice laced with venom. But Melissa heard the uncertainty now, the tremor of doubt beneath his bluster. The writ is binding. Then use it, Alaric challenged, his voice dripping with disdain. Burn the hall before these witnesses. Show them what your righteousness looks like. Show them the truth of your darkness. Merrick's smile returned, sharp and poisonous, a cruel mockery of triumph. As you wish. He held up the writ, and it began to smoke, a malevolent plume that rose into the air, a harbinger of destruction. Not ordinary smoke, but something black, oily, wrong, a substance that seemed to defy the laws of nature. It crawled across the parchment like a living shadow, consuming the ancient text. And when Merrick spoke words in a language that predated human civilization, a guttural tongue filled with power and malice, the smoke began to solidify into flame, taking on a life of its own. This wasn't fire that warmed or illuminated. This was fire that consumed, specifically designed to burn sanctuaries, to devour places of protection and reduce them to ash and memory, a weapon forged in the depths of darkness. The crowd gasped as the flames took shape, hovering in Merrick's palm like a caged beast, its hunger palpable. Outside, the rain changed, its intensity increasing, the steady downpour transforming into something sharper, harder, crystalline and cutting. Not rain anymore, but razors falling from the sky, each drop gleaming like broken glass in the streetlights, a shimmering curtain of destruction. The writ ignited fully, flames spreading up Merrick's arm without burning him, gathering strength and hunger, fueled by his malevolent will. Last chance, keeper, Merrick said, his voice thick with triumph, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. Surrender the Vesper children, and I will spare your hall. Refuse, and watch everything you've built turn to ash. Watch the light fade into darkness. The crowd pressed back against the walls, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance, their breath held in anticipation. The fate of the Whisper Light, and perhaps much more, hung precariously in the balance, dependent on the choice of one woman, one ordinary human who had dared to stand against the darkness. The walls of the cafe seemed to close in, the very air thickening with dread. The children, wide-eyed and trembling, instinctively edged closer to Melissa, seeking the comfort she radiated. Alaric's hand, a swift and subtle movement, went to a weapon concealed beneath his elegant coat, a weapon Melissa couldn't even fathom. She stood there, in the heart of her cafe, a humble coffee pot clutched in one hand, a lifetime 40 years of ordinary, heartfelt human kindness residing within her. In that moment she made her choice. No, she stated simply, her voice surprisingly firm against the rising tide of terror. Merrick, consumed by a feverish zeal, unleashed the fire. It hurtled through the air and slammed into the windows, erupting in a cacophony of screams. Not the familiar crackle and pop of ordinary flames, but a guttural metallic shriek, like the death throes of a creature that defied existence. The black fire, viscous and malevolent, spread across the glass like an oil slick, relentlessly seeking entry, ravenous for a sanctuary to desecrate and consume. Outside, the crimson vein pulsed with dark energy, the robed figures chanting in perfect unison, their voices a chorus of ancient words that predated language itself, beckoning the fire inward. The razor rain intensified, a blinding curtain that slashed visibility to mere feet, effectively trapping everyone within the Whisper Light. Inside, Melissa moved, not in retreat from the encroaching inferno, but towards her kitchen, the heart of warmth, the source of everything familiar and comforting. Carmen, she called out, her voice remarkably steady despite the frantic hammering of her heart. Help me with the cocoa. Joe, get the coffee maker going. Everyone who can hold a cup, start pouring. Are you insane? Someone shouted, their voice laced with disbelief and fear. The building's on fire. The building's under siege, Melissa corrected, her hands already reaching for her largest pot. And hospitality is how we fight back. She didn't understand the source of this sudden, unwavering conviction, but she felt it deep within her, the same way she'd sensed the hall awakening. Every act of service, every offering of kindness, was a fortification, feeding the sanctuary's strength. The fire thrived on fear and hatred. Warmth was its antithesis, Arya and Serafina, their faces pale but determined, joined her without hesitation, their small hands moving with an unnatural speed and efficiency, arranging delicate croissants on porcelain plates, filling mugs with steaming, fragrant cocoa. Adrian, his youthful face etched with a fierce resolve, stood guard by the booth, his butter knife clutched like a knight's sword. A tendril of the black fire found a hairline crack in the window sill and seeped through, a creeping shadow that crawled along the wall, leaving trails of char and the acrid stench of burning things that should never be subjected to flame. The air grew thick with the scent of despair, of dreams turned to ash. Hope, safety, home. No, Melissa said, her voice a quiet but unwavering defiance. She didn't shout, didn't scream, just spoke the word clearly, firmly, as she placed a steaming mug of cocoa on the counter. The fire recoiled, not extinguished, but held back, as if it had slammed into an invisible barrier. Melissa felt a surge of power coursing through her, the hall responding, recognizing the command of its keeper. Then, the windows shattered, the glass exploding inward in a shower of glittering shards. Alaric and Merrick surged through the shattered remains in a blur of movement, too fast for the human eye to fully register. They seemed to fight through reflections, appearing in mirrors, in the polished chrome of the espresso machine, in the rain-slicked windows, each surface a fleeting glimpse of a nightmarish battlefield. When they fully manifested, they were terrible to behold. Alaric, radiating an aura of pale fury and ancient power. Merrick, twisted with a fanatic rage that contorted his features into a grotesque mask. Both moved with the deadly grace of apex predators, their every gesture a promise of swift and brutal violence. The crowd screamed, scrambling back, desperate to escape the unfolding nightmare. Detective Morrison, his face pale and slick with sweat, drew his weapon, his hands shaking so violently he struggled to find his target. The manipulated officers stood frozen, the glamour that had clouded their minds shattering under the weight of impossible reality. "Hold the door," Morrison shouted suddenly, making a decisive choice. He grabbed a heavy wooden table and shoved it against the entrance, creating a makeshift barricade. "Nobody in or out. If this place falls, we all fall together." The citizens responded, spurred into action by Morrison's unexpected leadership. Joe and Carmen, the musician and the nurses, even the dazed officers, joined forces, barricading the door against the chanting Crimson Vein outside. The Whisper Light Cafe became a fortress, a sanctuary under siege. The hall became common ground, a shared space of defiance, and Melissa kept pouring. Cocoa and coffee, tea and warm milk. Each cup served with shaking hands and stubborn grace, a silent act of rebellion against the encroaching darkness. With every vessel filled, the black fire retreated another inch, its advance stalled by the simple power of human connection. The walls brightened, the oppressive shadows receding. The air grew warmer, despite the shattered windows and the chill of the relentless rain. The fire, still hungry, crawled closer to the children's booth. "No," Melissa said again, her voice resonating with newfound power, louder this time. Golden light, shimmering and ethereal, veined across the floor from where she stood. Thin lines at first, like delicate cracks in porcelain, then growing stronger, brighter, until they pulsed with warmth and life. Every meal she'd ever served the children, every small kindness, every moment of warmth freely given, manifested as luminous threads, spreading through the cafe, weaving a tapestry of protection. The keeper's oath, dormant until now, fully awakened, a force to be reckoned with. The black fire touched the golden light and dissolved, screaming as it went, its power nullified by the overwhelming purity of the sanctuary's defenses. The crimson-robed figures outside stumbled in their chanting, their ritual fracturing, their dark energies disrupted by the beacon of hope emanating from the cafe. Merrick roared in fury, breaking away from Alaric, his face contorted with disbelief and rage. "Impossible! The writ cannot be defeated." The golden light struck him like a physical wave, knocking him back. Smoke rose from his robes where the light touched, the dark magic that clung to him dissolving under its radiant warmth. The other hunters, their fanaticism crumbling, tried to flee, but the light pursued them through the broken windows, not burning them, but unmaking them, dissolving the hatred and fear that had bound them together until nothing remained but ash and the fading echo of their chant. The writ itself, the source of their power, caught fire, real fire this time, cleansing and bright, and crumbled to ash in Merrick's trembling hands. Merrick fell to his knees, his power broken, his followers gone, the weight of his failure crushing him. "Mercy!" he gasped, looking up at Alaric with wild, pleading eyes. "By the old laws, I claim mercy." Alaric stood over him, terrible and still, his presence radiating an ancient, unforgiving power. For a long moment he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly he nodded, a gesture that held the weight of centuries. "Rise, go. Tell the courts what you witnessed here." But as Alaric spoke, Merrick lunged, not at the vampire king, but at Melissa. A desperate, treacherous strike, his claws extending towards her throat with killing speed. He moved fast, fueled by desperation and a final surge of adrenaline. Alaric moved faster. The vampire king's hand, a blur of motion, caught Merrick by the throat mid-lunge, lifting him off the ground with effortless strength. There was no drama, no theatrical speech, no wasted energy. Alaric simply closed his fist, and Merrick crumbled, not to ash like his followers, but to nothing, erased so completely it was as if he'd never existed. His presence vanished from the room, leaving no trace behind. Silence crashed over the cafe like a physical weight, a sudden void that was more terrifying than the screams and explosions that had preceded it. The golden light faded gradually, leaving only the flickering glow of candles and the ordinary amber light of the overhead fixtures, which had somehow flickered back to life amidst the chaos. The razor rain outside subsided, returning to normal water, drumming peacefully against the miraculously restored windows. Melissa took one step forward, her legs suddenly giving way beneath her. She hit the floor hard, her vision swimming, the world tilting around her. When she touched her temple, her fingers came away red, stained with blood. At some point during the chaos, a shard of flying glass had cut her. She hadn't even felt it, her body numb with adrenaline and exhaustion. Alaric knelt beside her in an instant, his usual regal bearing replaced with a look of deep concern. No longer a king, but something gentler, something almost human. "You're injured." "I'm fine," Melissa mumbled, her head throbbing. Though the cafe was still spinning around her, she forced herself to focus on Alaric. "You're not." Alaric removed a ring from his finger. Heavy silver, set with a garnet stone that pulsed with an inner light, radiating a subtle warmth. He pressed it gently to her temple, and warmth flooded through her, knitting torn flesh, stopping the bleeding, pulling her back from the precipice of shock. When he drew the ring away, the cut was gone, leaving no trace behind. "You risked everything?" Alaric said quietly, his garnet eyes searching her face, probing her motives. "For children not your own, for creatures you barely understand." "Why?" "Because someone had to care," Melissa whispered, her voice hoarse. Alaric closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. When he opened them again, something ancient and heavy settled in his expression, a solemn acknowledgement of the sacrifice she had made. "Name your price, Melissa John. The Vesper line owes you more than eternity can repay. What do you ask?" Melissa looked around the cafe, at the frightened humans, at the three pale children watching with wide, unblinking eyes, at the battlefield that had once been her sanctuary, at the world she'd accidentally stumbled into. "A law," she said hoarsely, her voice barely a whisper. "Make a law. No vampire can take blood where warmth is freely given. Not just here, everywhere. Make it real." Alaric stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. The first real smile she'd seen from him, a genuine expression of warmth and gratitude. "Done," he said, his voice resonating with power, and the third bell tolled, its deep, resonant chime echoing through the cafe. The third bell's echo faded into silence, but something remained. A resonance. A palpable shift in the atmosphere that spread outward from the cafe like ripples on water, invisible, but undeniable. Alaric stood, helping Melissa to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. He turned to face the assembled witnesses, human and confused, frightened and awestruck. "By my authority as king of the undying court," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. "I proclaim the table decree. No blood shall be taken where warmth is freely given. Any hearth that offers sustenance without demand becomes sanctuary. Any hall that feeds the hungry without fear shall be honored by my realm." He drew a blade from beneath his cloak, ancient iron that gleamed with its own light, a weapon forged in the fires of the old world. He sliced his palm, the cut instantly healing, leaving no scar behind. Blood, dark as wine, dripped onto the cafe floor, pooling on the worn wooden planks. Where it fell, symbols blazed briefly, arcane sigils of power, before fading into the wood itself, becoming a permanent part of the cafe's very foundation. "This oath is bound in my blood," Alaric continued, his voice ringing with authority. "It will spread to every court, every house, every vampire who answers to my name. The age of predation without consequence has ended." Outside, though no one in the cafe could see it, the decree rippled outward through the supernatural world, a wave of binding law that forced ancient creatures to acknowledge, to accept, to obey. In nightclubs across the city, across continents, in shadowy mansions and forgotten crypts, vampires felt the oath settle into their bones like chains made of starlight, restricting their freedom, reminding them of the new order. The undying court had been remade, not by violence or war, but by the simple kindness of a waitress. 3 weeks later, Whisper Light Cafe looked nothing like it had before. The windows gleamed, polished to a sparkling shine, still bearing faint traces of the Vesper crest and the frost that never quite melted away, a subtle reminder of the supernatural forces at play. The sign outside glowed steady and bright, now reading Whisper Light Cafe, all welcome, a beacon of hope in the shadowed streets. Inside, the clientele had changed. Oh, there were still the usual regulars. Carmen and Joe, the musician and his friends, late-night workers seeking coffee and comfort. But now there were others, drawn to the sanctuary like moths to a flame. A pale woman in Victorian dress who ordered her coffee black and never touched the food but paid in antique coins, her presence radiating an aura of otherworldly grace. 2 teenagers with eyes that reflected light strangely, sharing a basket of croissants and whispering in languages that predated English, their voices like the murmur of ancient forests. An elderly man whose shadow didn't quite match his movements, nursing tea and reading a book older than the building, his gaze knowing and wise. The supernatural world had found its sanctuary, a place where they could exist, if not in peace, then at least in a fragile truce. Detective Morrison had become a regular fixture at the counter, his face etched with a permanent weariness. No longer investigating, but protecting. He'd seen too much that night to pretend the world was simple, but he'd also seen Melissa stand between children and monsters, her courage unwavering. That earned loyalty, the kind that was forged in fire and tempered by shared experience. "Coffee? Black? Nothing weird in it," he'd say every night, his voice gruff but his eyes holding a hint of a smile, and Melissa would smile back and pour, knowing she was serving more than just a drink. She was serving a symbol of hope. The Vesper children came every evening at 9:30, as reliable as the rain, their presence a comforting ritual. Tonight Alaric came with them. He paused at the threshold, his figure silhouetted against the darkness. No crown tonight, just a man in dark clothes with silver hair and tired eyes, a weary king burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his gloves before entering, a gesture of respect to the keeper, an acknowledgement of the sanctuary she had created. Inside, he didn't sit at a table, didn't seek the comfort of the cafe's warmth. He stood by the window, his gaze fixed on his children, watching them laugh over warm croissants that left crumbs on their formal clothing, their pale faces bright with simple joy. "They're happy here," Melissa said, approaching him with a cup of coffee, her voice soft. She knew he wouldn't drink, but the offering was a gesture of connection, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond. "You could join them, you know. Sit." "Kings don't sit in halls," Alaric replied, but his tone was gentle, lacking its usual regal edge. "We stand guard. Even kings need rest." He looked at her then, really looked, his garnet eyes searching her soul. Not as a subject or an asset, but as something he couldn't quite name, something rare and precious. "You've changed more than laws, Melissa John. You've reminded us what we lost when we stopped being human." "You're still learning," Melissa said, her voice warm with affection. "That's good. Means you're not too old to grow." The corner of his mouth quirked, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Not quite a smile, but close," she teased. "Impertinent," he said, but the word was spoken without malice. "Honest," she corrected, her eyes sparkling. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the cafe buzz with its strange new life, a testament to the power of kindness and the resilience of the human spirit. Finally, Alaric set down the untouched coffee, his gaze lingering on Melissa for a moment longer than necessary. "I should go. Civil war doesn't pause for sentiment." "Be safe," Melissa said, her voice laced with genuine concern. Then softer, almost a whisper, "Come back." Something flickered in his ancient eyes, a brief glimpse of vulnerability. Gratitude, perhaps, or the echo of feelings he'd thought long dead. "Always," he promised, the word hanging in the air like a sacred vow. He gathered his children with a gesture, a silent command, and they left together into the rain, three small figures flanking their father like pale stars around a dark moon, their silhouettes disappearing into the shadows of the night. Later, after closing, Melissa stood at the window, wiping down the tables, the scent of coffee and cocoa lingering in the air. The rain had returned, turning the street into a mirror of light and shadow, reflecting the glow of the cafe's warm interior. In the reflection, she caught it. A silhouette across the street, tall and crowned, watching, not hiding anymore, just present. A guardian in the darkness, silently ensuring the safety of his sanctuary. Melissa smiled at the glass, acknowledging his presence. She turned to the door, ready to flip the sign to closed, then paused, her hand hovering over the lock. Outside, barely visible through the rain-streaked window, she saw them. A small figure, then two, hesitant on the corner, huddled beneath the awning of a closed shop. Children, or something like children, soaked and shivering, their faces pale and drawn, too afraid to approach, their eyes filled with a desperate longing. Melissa flipped the sign to open, instead, the small gesture a beacon of hope in the darkness. She unlocked the door, the click echoing in the silent cafe. She turned on the espresso machine, started warming milk, pulled fresh croissants from the case, the familiar routine a comfort in itself. The children would come or they wouldn't, but the light would be on. The door would be open because someone small might need cocoa, someone forgotten might need kindness, someone hunted might need sanctuary. And Melissa John, 28, tired, ordinary in every way that didn't matter, had accidentally become the woman who'd changed the rules for an immortal realm, who'd turned a failing cafe into a hall that vampires honored and humans trusted, who'd proven that warmth freely given was stronger than any ancient magic. The door chimed, a soft, welcoming sound that broke the silence. The small figures shuffled inside, pale and nervous, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Melissa smiled, her face radiating warmth and compassion. "Welcome to Whisper Light," she said, reaching for mugs, her voice gentle and reassuring. "What can I get you?" Outside, the Vampire King watched from the rain, his expression, had anyone been able to see it, something between wonder and worship, a silent tribute to the woman who had reminded him what it meant to be human. Inside, Melissa poured cocoa and arranged croissants and folded napkins with practiced grace, humming softly to herself, the melody a gentle lullaby. After all, She had a kingdom to feed, a haven to protect, and a legacy to uphold. Narrator's voice: thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next.